200 souls answered the call. 200 souls were broken. One lasted a mere half-dozen heartbeats. Another only 4. A particularly self-assured judo expert from Osaka, a black belt, managed to stretch his survival to 8 seconds. Yet, across the globe, not a single man had ever endured a full 10 seconds in his presence. Not one. His name was Victor Kranoff, though that wasn't the name his mother gave him. In the shadowy, unregulated fighting circuits that thrived in the 1960s, real identities were liabilities, so aliases were the rule. They called him the Mountain. Standing 6'3" and weighing an astonishing 500 pounds, he was a monument of intimidating, untamed humanity. His origins lay in the Soviet Union, where he had been a Greco-Roman wrestling titan. But in 1961, he saw an opportunity in the West and defected to America, discovering a trade far more lucrative than amateur wrestling: the sale of terror. He was a merchant of fear, and business was spectacularly good. The proposition was elegantly simple: survive for 10 seconds. Victory was not the objective. Combat was not required. You didn't even need to land a single punch. The sole condition was to remain standing, to retain consciousness, to avoid submission, and to stay within the ring's boundaries for a mere 10 seconds. That was the entire deal. The prize was a staggering $80,000. In 1967, that sum represented more than the average American could earn in 4 years of labor. It was enough to purchase a home in the sprawling suburbs of Los Angeles. Enough to fundamentally alter the course of a person's life. The catch, however, was a brutal one. Across 200 attempts, spanning 15 different cities, no one had ever succeeded. Not once. The money remained perpetually locked within a briefcase, positioned conspicuously at the edge of every stage, a tempting, glowing, and thoroughly untouchable beacon. The location was Los Angeles, California. The venue was the Grand Olympic Auditorium. The date was November 11, 1967, a Saturday night. The annual International Martial Arts Exposition was in its second day. The vast auditorium hosted a near-capacity crowd of 800 spectators. The air was thick with a heady cocktail of popcorn, leather, and human exertion. Cigarette smoke drifted lazily through the beams of the spotlights, turning the fighters on the main stage into ghostly silhouettes moving through a haze. But the buzz in the room had little to do with the formal karate demonstrations, the elegant judo throws, or the intricate wrist locks of Aikido. Everyone knew the true attraction. It was the main event, boldly emblazoned in red ink on every poster, that plastered the walls of martial arts dojos from the Mexican border to the Bay Area. The Mountain Challenge. The proposition was clear: survive 10 seconds, claim $80,000. Beneath that headline was a record that read like a battlefield casualty report: 200 challengers, 200 defeated. The average survival time was a paltry 4.7 seconds. And then, a final question, crafted to burrow deep into the psyche of every martial artist who saw it, squeezing their pride until it either swelled with delusion or collapsed in defeat. Are you brave enough? In the 14th row, a slight man in a black mandarin collared jacket was studying the program. His gaze fixed on that number, 4.7 seconds. He read it again. His expression was an unreadable mask. His name was Bruce Lee. He was 27 years old, weighed a mere 138 pounds, and stood just 5 feet 7 inches tall. This was the same man who, 3 years prior, had single-handedly dismantled the beliefs of 500 karate practitioners at the Long Beach International Championships. This was the same man who portrayed Kato on television, moving with such blinding speed that standard film cameras failed to capture his actions at normal speed. This was the same man who could perform push-ups on 2 fingers and launch a 200-pound adversary across a room with a punch initiated from a single inch away. That man was sitting in the 14th row, reading a program that boldly stated, "No human being on earth can survive 10 seconds against the Mountain." And in that moment, something shifted behind his eyes. 3 days earlier, his student, Dan Inosanto, had called him. Dan had acquired 2 extra tickets to the exposition, but that wasn't the reason for his call. He called because he understood the one thing Bruce Lee could never resist: an unsolvable problem. Dan had described a behemoth at the expo, a near 500-pound monster, who had been systematically dismantling martial artists from all over the country. 200 challengers across 15 cities. Not a single one had lasted the distance. Karate black belts, judo champions, professional wrestlers, boxers, the result was always the same. Bruce had been silent on the phone. Dan recognized that silence. It was the sound of Bruce Lee's mind engaging a gear that most human beings simply didn't possess. The analytical gear, the problem-solving gear, the gear that had transformed a skinny teenager from Hong Kong into the most formidable 138 pounds on the planet. What's his technique? Bruce had finally asked. That's the thing, Dan had replied. He doesn't really have one. He just grabs you. And once he has you, it's over. The disparity in strength is so absolute that technique becomes meaningless. He picks men up, pins them, crushes them. In Chicago, a man had 3 ribs fractured just from being pressed against the mat. Bruce had asked a second, more pointed question. How does he grab? Dan paused. What do you mean? I mean his entry, Bruce clarified. How does he close the distance? Does he rush forward? Does he wait? Does he circle? Is it his left hand or right hand first? Does he reach high or low? Dan considered this. He rushes, Dan said. Straight forward, both arms spread wide like a bear. He tries to envelop you in a clinch. Once he gets his arms around you, your feet leave the ground, and the fight is over. Bruce said nothing for precisely 4 seconds. Dan counted. Then Bruce spoke. A bear hug requires 2 arms to encircle the body. That means his center line is completely exposed for roughly 1.5 seconds during his entry. For that window, his chest, his throat, and his solar plexus have 0 protection. Dan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had trained with Bruce for years. He knew what Bruce could accomplish in 1.5 seconds. Most people could simply blink in that time. Bruce Lee could deliver 6 devastating strikes. You're going to challenge him, aren't you? Dan had said. It wasn't a question. Bruce answered anyway. Get me 2 tickets. Good seats. And now they were here. Row 14, Grand Olympic Auditorium. The program in Bruce's hand stated the average survival time was 4.7 seconds. He read it once, then twice, folded the paper, and slid it into his jacket pocket. He wouldn't need it again. He had already committed the only statistic that mattered to his memory. It wasn't 4.7 seconds. It wasn't even 10 seconds. It was 1.5. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. A single, brilliant spotlight illuminated the center of the stage. The crowd's murmuring died down to a whisper, and then to absolute silence. A voice, deep and theatrical, crackled through the speaker system, the kind of voice that belonged to a boxing ring or a circus tent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the main event of the International Martial Arts Exposition. The moment you have been waiting for. The challenge that has broken every man brave enough to accept it. The announcer paused, letting the silence do its work. He had performed this ritual in 15 cities. He knew how to build tension. He knew how to sell fear. Karate champions, judo masters, professional wrestlers, Golden Gloves boxers, college football linebackers, military combat instructors, Marines, Green Berets. Every kind of tough man this country can produce has tried. The announcer's voice dropped even lower. Every single one has failed. The longest anyone has survived is 8.3 seconds. A judo black belt from Osaka, Japan. He lasted those 8.3 seconds before he was lifted 4 feet from the ground and driven into the stage so hard the wooden planks splintered beneath him. He walked with a limp for 6 weeks. The rules are simple. You step into the ring. The bell rings. If you are still on your feet, still conscious, and still inside the ring after 10 seconds, you win $80,000 in cash. The announcer gestured to the edge of the stage, where a man in a black suit stood holding an open briefcase. Inside, stacks of $100 bills, crisp and green, were on display. A spotlight caught the money, and it seemed to glow. The audience stared, mesmerized. $80,000 was right there. Tangible. Attainable. If you could only survive. And now, the announcer boomed. Please welcome the man who has made that money untouchable. The undisputed, undefeated, unstoppable force of nature, standing 6 feet 3 inches, weighing nearly 500 pounds. The mountain, Victor Kranoff. The stage shook before he even appeared. That wasn't an exaggeration. The very wooden platform vibrated as he emerged from behind the curtain. You felt his presence before you saw him. The audience gasped. They had seen big men before, sumo wrestlers on television, strongmen at county fairs. This was different. Victor Kranoff was not simply fat. That was the terrifying part. He was massive in a way that seemed biologically improbable. His shoulders were broader than most doorways. His chest resembled a barrel wrapped in skin stretched to its absolute limit. His thighs were thicker than the waists of most men. His hands hung at his sides like two catcher's mitts made of flesh, each finger the width of a normal man's thumb. His neck had disappeared entirely into a mountainous ridge of trapezius muscle, connecting his skull directly to his shoulders. He walked to the center stage, standing under the spotlight. He didn't flex. He didn't pose. He didn't need to. His very existence was his demonstration. The shadow he cast was immense, covering half the stage. The audience was silent. It was not the respectful quiet of a karate tournament, but a terrified silence. The silence of prey in the presence of a predator. Victor never spoke. He hadn't spoken during a single challenge in 15 cities. Not in 200 fights. He didn't need words. The announcer did his talking for him. Victor simply stood there, letting gravity do his introduction. He had a ritual, the same one every time. He walked to the edge of the stage and picked up a wooden folding chair. It was a standard issue, the kind used in churches and school assemblies. He held it in one hand as if it were a pencil. Then he closed his fist. The chair didn't break. It didn't snap. Compressed. The wood crumpled inward like paper, the metal legs bending like soft wire. In 3 seconds, a functional chair was reduced to a twisted knot of wood and metal no larger than a basketball. He dropped it. It hit the stage with a dead, final thump. The audience didn't clap. They didn't even breathe. One woman in the 5th row stood up and left without a word. She had seen enough. 3 challengers stepped forward before the announcer scanned the room for a 4th. A Marine, 230 pounds, with a crew cut and military bearing. He lasted 3.1 seconds. His feet left the ground at 2.4. His face went white, his eyes wide with panic. He couldn't breathe. His ribs were compressing. He tapped out at 3.1, 3 quick taps, the universal signal for surrender. He sat on the stage, gasping, clutching his ribs, his eyes wet with involuntary tears from the pressure on his chest cavity. A wrestler from UCLA, 260 pounds. He survived 5.2 seconds. A Kempo black belt from San Diego, 195 pounds, managed 4.1 seconds. 3 challengers down. 3 failures. The briefcase remained locked. The $80,000 remained untouched. The audience had done the mathematics. Size wins. Mass wins. Gravity wins. The laws of physics were undefeated, just like Victor Kranoff. The announcer scanned the crowd again. His voice had lost some of its theatrical flair. Anyone else? Last call. $80,000. 10 seconds. Anyone? Silence. Nobody moved. The audience had all made the same calculation. 200 men had already tried. 3 more had just failed before their eyes. Different styles, different backgrounds, the same result. Grabbed, lifted, crushed, done. The announcer was about to close the challenge, about to add 3 more names to the list of the defeated. I'll try. The voice was quiet, conversational. It came from the middle of the auditorium, row 14. Carried no aggression, no bravado, no chest-thumping declaration of courage. Just 2 words spoken with the casualness of ordering coffee. The announcer squinted into the darkness beyond the stage lights. Who said that? I did. A man stood up. Row 14, seat 6. Black mandarin collar jacket, black pants. No uniform, no visible belt. He was small. That was the first thing everyone noticed. Not just small in the ordinary sense, but small in the context of what he was volunteering for. The 3 men who had just failed were 230, 260, and 195 pounds. This man looked like he weighed less than all of them. Significantly less. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some people laughed, but not cruelly. It was protective laughter, the kind that pleaded, "Please don't do this to yourself." A woman a few seats away whispered to her husband, "Someone should stop him. He'll get killed." The announcer hesitated. "Sir, are you sure? This is full contact. There are no weight classes, no protective gear. You understand what you just saw?" "I saw it clearly," the man said. His voice was calm, almost amused. "That's why I'm volunteering." Dan Inosanto grabbed Bruce's sleeve. His whisper was urgent, a mix of Cantonese and English, the language they always used when they didn't want eavesdroppers. "Bruce, I brought you here to watch, not to fight. You weigh 138 pounds. He weighs 500. That's a 360-pound difference. Bruce, this isn't philosophy. This is bone density, compression force, a hospital visit." Bruce buttoned his jacket, a single, deliberate gesture. It was the same one he always made before something began. He looked at Dan. 1.5 seconds, Dan. That's all I need." Bruce Lee walked toward the stage. 800 people watched him. Every single one was thinking the same thing. Asterisk, this man is going to get hurt badly. He's too small, too light, too thin. Asterisk, the three men who had just failed had a combined weight advantage of over 700 pounds over Victor, and they still lost. This man looked like he could fit inside Victor's shadow. The walk from row 14 to the stage was 40 feet. Bruce covered it in exactly the time it took for the audience to start feeling guilty about watching. The scene felt wrong, like watching someone walk into traffic. He reached the stage, climbed the steps, 2 steps, and his feet made almost no sound on the wood. Where Victor made the stage tremble, Bruce made it whisper. He walked to center stage. And for the first time, the audience saw them together, Victor Kranoff and Bruce Lee, side by side under the same spotlight. The image was so absurd that a man in the 7th row actually stood up and shouted, "Don't do it, kid! You don't have to prove anything." Bruce didn't turn around. He didn't acknowledge the warning. He was already past the point where words from strangers held any meaning. The announcer approached Bruce with a clipboard. "Standard procedure. Name, Bruce Lee. Weight, 138 pounds. The announcer's pen stopped moving. He looked up at Victor, then back at Bruce. 138? That's correct, sir. The lightest challenger tonight was 195 pounds. The lightest challenger ever was 172. You're 138. I can count, Bruce said. The announcer stared for a moment, then wrote it down. Martial arts background? Jeet Kune Do, Wing Chun, Chinese boxing. The announcer had never heard of Jeet Kune Do. He scribbled Chinese martial arts and moved on. Any injuries or medical conditions we should know about? None, Bruce said. But you should have a medical team ready. The announcer blinked. We always do, for the challenger. Bruce looked at him. His expression was perfectly neutral. I wasn't talking about me. The announcer walked away, confused. Victor stood in his corner. He had watched this small man approach. He had heard the stats, 138 pounds. He processed the information the same way he processed all challenger information. As irrelevant. Weight didn't matter when the minimum was this low. Whether the man weighed 138 or 238, the result would be identical. Grab, lift, squeeze, drop. Next. But something made Victor look twice. He couldn't identify it. It was something in the way the small man moved. Something in the way he stood. His feet weren't planted the way frightened men planted their feet. Wide, rigid, bracing for impact. This man's feet were light. His weight was shifted slightly forward, just enough to suggest that he wasn't preparing to defend. He was preparing to attack. Victor dismissed the thought. Attack what? His kneecap. Victor had 360 pounds on this man. There was nothing to attack when you were facing a mountain. Mountains didn't have weak points. Mountains just existed. And everything smaller than a mountain eventually got crushed. The announcer returned to center stage. Ladies and gentlemen, our final challenger of the evening, Bruce Lee, 138 pounds. representing Chinese martial arts. The audience applauded politely, sympathetically, the way you clap for someone you expect to see carried off on a stretcher. A few martial artists in the crowd recognized the name. Whispers traveled. That's the guy from the Green Hornet. The one who plays Kato. He's a kung fu teacher in LA. Is he crazy? He's going to die in there. One man in the back row, an elderly Chinese gentleman who had trained in Wing Chun for 30 years, gripped his armrest and said nothing. He knew something this crowd didn't. He knew what Wing Chun was designed for. Not tournaments, not demonstrations, not Hollywood. Survival against bigger, stronger opponents in the narrow alleyways of southern China, where running wasn't an option, and size meant nothing in a space 3 feet wide. The bell rang. Victor did what Victor always did. He exploded forward, both arms wide, head down. 500 pounds of human freight train, covering the distance between them in under 2 seconds. This was the moment that had ended 200 men. This was the rush, the avalanche, the tsunami of flesh and bone that no technique in any martial art had been able to answer. Every previous challenger had done one of 3 things. Some froze, paralyzed by the sight of 500 pounds charging at them. They got grabbed while standing still. Some retreated, backpedaling, trying to escape. Victor was faster than he looked. He caught them at the ropes. Some attacked, throwing a punch, a kick, a desperate technique that bounced off Victor's body like rain off concrete. Then they got grabbed. Every response had failed. All 3 options had been tried hundreds of times. Freeze, retreat, attack. None of them worked. Bruce Lee chose option 4. The option that didn't exist. The option no one had tried because no one had thought of it. He moved forward. Not backward, not sideways. Into the charge toward 500 pounds of oncoming destruction. The audience gasped. Several people looked away. They didn't want to see the collision. A 138-pound man moving toward a 500-pound freight train wasn't bravery. It was mathematics. And the mathematics said this man was about to be destroyed. But Bruce Lee didn't collide with Victor Kranoff. Bruce Lee was not where Victor expected him to be. In the 1.8 seconds it took Victor to cross the ring, Bruce had moved forward and to the left. Not far, just 18 inches. Enough to be outside the arc of Victor's outstretched arms. Enough to let 500 pounds of momentum rush past him like a train passing a man standing 1 foot from the tracks. You felt the wind. You felt the ground shake. But you were untouched. Victor's arms closed on empty air. His momentum carried him 2 steps past where Bruce had been standing. For the first time in 203 challengers, Victor Kranoff had grabbed nothing. Victor turned, confused. This had never happened. In 203 attempts, no one had ever made him miss. He reset, faced Bruce again and charged again. Faster this time. Angrier. His arms swept wider, covering more area, leaving no escape. Bruce moved again. Same direction. Left. But this time he didn't just evade. As Victor's massive right arm swept past him, Bruce's left hand touched it lightly. 2 fingers on the inside of Victor's wrist. Not pushing, not grabbing. The arm that was meant to trap him continued its arc, but now traveled 2 inches further than Victor intended. 2 inches. In combat, 2 inches was the difference between capture and freedom. Victor's arms closed Bruce. They closed on each other instead of their target. Victor was hugging himself. 500 pounds of confused momentum stumbled forward, while a 138-pound man stood calmly behind him, like a matador who had just let the bull pass. The audience couldn't process what they were seeing. Their brains rejected it. This small man wasn't just surviving. He was making the giant miss repeatedly, effortlessly, as if it were choreographed. But it wasn't choreographed. Victor's frustration was real. His confusion was genuine. His breath was getting heavier. He had never worked this hard. Never had to chase a challenger. Challengers came to him. They got grabbed. They failed. That was the script. This man was rewriting the script. Victor charged a 3rd time. Every ounce of 500 pounds committed. No technique, no strategy. Pure animal aggression. The mountain coming down on a village. And this time, Bruce didn't just evade. He stepped, close, impossibly close, inside the radius of Victor's arms, where the grab had no power. His right foot planted between Victor's massive boots. His right hand rose, open palm aimed upward at Victor's chin. It stopped 1 inch away. Not a punch. A message. 1 inch between Bruce Lee's palm and Victor Kranoff's jaw. 1 inch between consciousness and unconsciousness. 1 inch between standing and falling. 1 inch between the mountain and the ground. Bruce held it there. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Victor froze. His eyes crossed, trying to focus on the hand below his chin. He understood. For the first time since he'd started this challenge, Victor Kranoff understood that he was not the most dangerous person on this stage. The arena held its breath for 3 seconds. Then it detonated. 800 people erupted, screaming, standing, stomping the old wooden floor until it shook harder than Victor's footsteps ever had. They had just witnessed the impossible. A 138-pound man didn't just survive. He made surviving look unnecessary. He proved that the question was never, could you survive 10 seconds against the mountain? The real question was, could the mountain survive against someone who understood that size is a wall? But speed is water, and water always finds a way through the wall? Bruce stepped back, bowed slightly, and walked off the stage. He descended the steps and made his way back through the auditorium to row 14, seat 6. He sat down. Dan Inosanto was shaking. His hands were trembling. How many seconds was that? Bruce picked up his program, opened it to the page he had folded, and smoothed the crease with his thumb. I wasn't counting, he said. I told you, I wasn't interested in surviving 10 seconds. The briefcase sat at the edge of the stage. $80,000, untouched. Bruce Lee never collected it. He never asked. He hadn't come for the money. He came to prove something that no amount of cash could buy. That physics has exceptions, that mountains have weak points, and that 138 pounds of water will always find a way around 500 pounds of rock. 800 witnesses. 203 who failed. 1 who didn't. November 11th, 1967. The Grand Olympic Auditorium. The night the mountain met the water, and the water prevailed.